My name is Sarah Chen. I'm 32 years old, a cybersecurity engineer at CloudTech Solutions here in Portland, Oregon. For the past decade, I've made my living hunting down digital lies, tracking fake identities, and exposing online fraud. I've helped law enforcement crack cases involving deepfakes, synthetic media, and AI-generated deceptions that would make your head spin. I thought I'd seen every dirty trick in the digital playbook. I was wrong. Nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the day I discovered my own sister had weaponized artificial intelligence against me, creating an entire fabricated reality designed to destroy my life and steal everything my father had built. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The courtroom felt suffocating that Tuesday morning in downtown Portland. Rain streaked the tall windows of the Multnomah County Courthouse, casting shifting shadows across the polished wood floors. I sat at the defendant's table wearing my best black blazer, hands folded, spine straight, trying to project the confidence that had carried me through a dozen corporate boardrooms. But inside, my world was cracking apart like a phone screen after a hard fall. Jessica, my older sister, stood at the plaintiff's table looking every inch the successful marketing executive she'd always been. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon, her navy suit pressed to crisp lines, her voice steady as she addressed the judge. She'd been talking for 10 minutes about family loyalty, about trust, about how our father would be heartbroken if he could see what I'd become. Every word felt like a blade between my ribs. The courtroom was packed with faces I recognized. Colleagues from CloudTech Solutions, neighbors from the Hawthorne district, reporters from the Portland Business Journal. They'd all come to watch the Chen family tear itself apart in public. Jessica's voice rose as she reached the crescendo of her opening statement, her finger pointing directly at me with theatrical precision. Your Honor, the evidence will show that Sarah Chen systematically manipulated our father during his final months, using her technical expertise to fabricate conversations, forge digital communications, and gaslight a dying man into believing he'd made promises he never made. She didn't just steal his company, she stole his voice, his words, his very memory. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt every eye in the courtroom boring into me, waiting for me to crumble, to break down, to admit to crimes I'd never committed. My mother, Linda, sat in the front row behind Jessica's table, her face a mask of disappointment I'd been seeing for months. David, my younger brother, was 3 rows back, his eyes cast down at his hands, refusing to look at either of us. The weight of their judgment pressed down on my shoulders like lead. But I didn't flinch, not because Jessica's accusations didn't hurt, they carved through me like a chainsaw through paper, but because I'd come prepared for this moment. I'd spent weeks gathering evidence, analyzing metadata, following digital breadcrumbs that led to a truth so stunning it would reshape everything we thought we knew about artificial intelligence and family betrayal. Without a word, I reached into my leather messenger bag and withdrew a slim silver laptop. The same one I'd used to uncover corporate espionage schemes and unmask cybercriminals. My heels clicked softly against the polished floor as I stood and walked toward the judge's bench. The courtroom fell silent except for the soft patter of rain against the windows. I opened the laptop with deliberate precision and turned the screen toward Judge Patricia Morrison. Your Honor, I'd like to present digital evidence that will fundamentally change the nature of these proceedings. Judge Morrison leaned forward, her reading glasses catching the overhead lights. She was in her 60s, silver-haired, known for her no-nonsense approach to complex litigation. As she studied the screen, I watched her expression shift from skeptical attention to genuine surprise, then to something approaching alarm. Her eyebrows knitted together as she scrolled through files, examining spectrograms, frequency analyses, and blockchain timestamps that told a story no human voice could fabricate. Counselor, she said, addressing Jessica's attorney without looking up from the screen. I'm seeing evidence here that suggests the voice recordings central to your case may have been artificially generated. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Jessica's face went pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. Her attorney, Marcus Wellington, a silver-haired man in his 50s who specialized in estate litigation, stumbled over his words as he tried to formulate a response. Your Honor, that's a serious allegation. We'd need independent verification of. You'll get it, Judge Morrison interrupted, her voice carrying new authority. Bailiff, please secure this courtroom. I'm ordering an immediate recess while we bring in digital forensics experts. The bailiff moved with practiced efficiency, sealing the main doors as two officers from the Oregon State Police Cybercrimes Unit entered through the side entrance. They'd been waiting outside at my attorney's request, though I hadn't told Jessica's team about their presence. The lead investigator, Detective Sarah Chen, approached the bench with the kind of calm professionalism that comes from handling sensitive digital evidence cases. Behind me, I could hear Jessica's sharp intake of breath, the rustle of papers as her legal team scrambled to regroup. My mother's face had gone ashen.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Her perfectly composed facade finally cracking. David had looked up for the first time since the hearing began, his eyes wide with something between confusion and dawning realization. Detective Chen accepted the laptop from Judge Morrison and began her preliminary examination. The courtroom remained sealed, the air thick with tension and the promise of revelations that would change everything. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. This was about the terrifying power of artificial intelligence in the wrong hands, about how trust could be weaponized, and about a sister who'd been willing to destroy her own family to get what she wanted. As I returned to my seat, I caught Jessica's eye for the first time that day. Gone was the confident prosecutor who'd been systematically dismantling my character for the past hour. In its place was something I'd never seen in my sister's face before: genuine fear. She was beginning to understand that her perfectly crafted deception was about to unravel in the most public way possible. The digital evidence on that laptop didn't just prove my innocence. It revealed a conspiracy so sophisticated, so chillingly premeditated, that it would reshape how we thought about family, technology, and the very nature of truth in the digital age. Jessica had used cutting-edge AI voice synthesis to create dozens of fake conversations with our father, complete with emotional inflections and speech patterns that would fool anyone who wasn't trained in digital forensics. She'd manufactured text message threads, fabricated email exchanges, and constructed an entire alternative history of our father's final months. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated the very sister she was trying to destroy. I was a cybersecurity expert who specialized in detecting exactly this kind of digital deception. And over the past 3 months, while she thought I was wallowing in grief and legal confusion, I'd been conducting the most important investigation of my career. I'd traced the digital signatures, analyzed the synthesis patterns, and built an ironclad case that would not only clear my name but expose Jessica's crimes to law enforcement and the tech industry she'd tried so hard to impress. The truth was about to emerge, pixel by pixel, frequency by frequency, timestamp by timestamp. And when it did, Jessica Chen would learn that in the world of digital forensics, there's no such thing as the perfect crime. Every artificial conversation leaves traces. Every deepfake carries fingerprints. And every lie, no matter how technologically sophisticated, eventually meets someone smart enough to decode it. As Detective Chen continued her analysis, the rain outside intensified, drumming against the courthouse windows like an urgent message. But inside this sealed courtroom, surrounded by the debris of a family torn apart by deception and greed, a different kind of storm was about to break. The kind that washes away lies and reveals the bedrock truth underneath. My father, Robert Chen, had always taught us that technology was only as good as the person wielding it. He'd spent his life building AI tools that could help people, solve problems, and create connections. He never could have imagined that his own daughter would pervert those same technologies to wage war against his memory and destroy the family he'd loved so deeply. But truth has a way of surfacing, especially when you know where to look for it. And I'd been looking very, very carefully. The composed response. The moments that followed Detective Chen's arrival stretched like taffy in the summer heat. I remained seated, my breathing controlled, my posture unchanged, while chaos swirled around me in slow motion. Jessica's attorney was frantically whispering to his paralegal, shuffling through documents with the desperate energy of someone who'd just realized their entire case was built on quicksand. My mother clutched her pearls so tightly I could see the whites of her knuckles from across the room. But I didn't move. Not yet. This wasn't my first rodeo with digital deception cases. I'd learned years ago that the most powerful weapon in any cybersecurity investigation wasn't cutting-edge software or expensive equipment. It was patience. The ability to remain calm while your opponents revealed their weaknesses, their panic, their tells. Jessica had always been the dramatic one in our family, the one who gesticulated wildly during arguments, who raised her voice when she felt cornered. Right now, she was doing something I'd never seen before. She was sitting perfectly still, her face a mask of forced composure that didn't quite hide the tremor in her left hand. Detective Kim worked methodically at the laptop, her fingers dancing across the keyboard with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent years unraveling digital lies. The machine's cooling fan hummed softly in the otherwise silent courtroom, occasionally punctuated by the soft click of mouse buttons and the almost inaudible whisper of data being processed. Every few seconds, she would pause, lean closer to examine something on the screen, then continue her analysis. Judge Morrison watched the proceedings with the intensity of a hawk studying its prey. She'd been presiding over complex litigation for over 2 decades, but I could tell this case was different. Technology cases always were. They required a different kind of thinking, a willingness to accept that evidence could exist in forms that had no physical substance, yet carried more weight than any paper document ever could. Detective Kim, the judge said finally, her voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. Can you provide the court with a preliminary assessment of what you're finding? Kim looked up from the screen, her expression professional but grave. Your Honor, without completing a full forensic analysis, I can confirm that the audio files presented as evidence by the plaintiff show clear indicators of artificial synthesis. The spectral analysis reveals frequency patterns consistent with neural voice cloning technology, and the metadata timestamps indicate post-production processing that wouldn't be present in authentic recordings. The words hit Jessica like physical blows. I watched her shoulders tense, saw her jaw clench in that familiar way it always did when she was preparing to fight back. She'd been caught, but Jessica Chen had never been the type to go down quietly. She was calculating, even now, looking for an angle, a way to spin this revelation in her favor. Your Honor, Marcus Wellington stood, his voice carrying just a hint of desperation beneath its practiced smoothness. We respectfully request time to examine this alleged evidence with our own technical experts. The defendant's background in cybersecurity could certainly provide her with the knowledge to fabricate. Counselor, Judge Morrison's voice was ice cold. Are you suggesting that the defendant created fake evidence to prove that the plaintiff's evidence is fake? That's quite a circular accusation. Wellington's face flushed red above his expensive tie. I'm simply saying that we need independent verification before accepting conclusions that could fundamentally alter the nature of these proceedings. I finally stood, smoothing down my blazer with deliberate calm. Every eye in the courtroom turned to me, but I kept my focus on Judge Morrison. Your Honor, I welcome the most thorough examination possible. In fact, I've prepared additional evidence that I believe will provide context for what Detective Kim has discovered. The judge nodded slowly. Proceed, Miss Chen. I returned to my messenger bag and withdrew a thick manila folder, the kind that had gone somewhat out of style in our digital age, but still carried a certain gravitas in legal proceedings. The papers inside represented hundreds of hours of investigation, cross-referencing, and digital archaeology. They told a story that went far beyond a simple inheritance dispute. Your Honor, the synthetic audio recordings are just the tip of the iceberg. Over the past 3 months, I've uncovered evidence of a systematic campaign to manipulate digital communications, forge electronic documents, and create an entirely fabricated narrative about my relationship with my father during his final months. I placed the folder on the defendant's table and opened it to reveal the first page, a timeline stretching back 6 months, marked with dates, times, and digital signatures that painted a picture of deception so comprehensive it took my breath away, even though I'd compiled it myself. The first synthetic audio file was created on March 15, 2 weeks after my father's funeral. The technology used was commercially available voice cloning software, but the implementation shows a level of sophistication that suggests either professional assistance or considerable technical expertise. Jessica's mask finally slipped. Her eyes widened just a fraction, but it was enough. She knew I was about to expose not just what she'd done, but how she'd done it. The technical details that would prove premeditation, planning, and a level of calculated cruelty that would shock even those who thought they knew her. Your Honor, I continued, I've identified the specific software platform used to generate these fake conversations. It's called VoiceForge Pro, and it requires a minimum of 20 minutes of source audio to create convincing synthesis. The question we need to ask is, where did my sister obtain 20 minutes of our father's voice, saying things he never said? The courtroom remained silent, but I could feel the tension ratcheting up another notch. Detective Kim had stopped her analysis and was listening intently. Even David, my younger brother, had finally raised his head and was staring at me with something approaching awe. The answer, I said, reaching for another document from the folder, is that she didn't need him to say anything new at all. She used existing recordings from family videos, business meetings, and personal calls, then employed AI text-to-speech technology to make his voice say whatever she wanted it to say. The implications hung in the air like smoke from a fire. This wasn't just about inheritance fraud. This was about the fundamental violation of a person's identity, about using technology to puppeteer the dead for personal gain. It was about a daughter who'd been willing to desecrate her father's memory for money. Judge Morrison leaned back in her chair, her expression troubled. Chen, these are extremely serious allegations. Do you have evidence to support this technical explanation? I do, Your Honor. I've traced the digital fingerprints of every fabricated audio file, identified the source material used for voice synthesis, and documented the timeline of creation. More importantly, I've discovered evidence that my sister didn't work alone. That last statement hit the courtroom like a thunderclap. Jessica's face went white as snow, and her attorney actually dropped his pen, but it was my mother's reaction that caught my attention. Linda Chen, who had sat through the entire morning, with the rigid composure of a woman defending her eldest daughter's honor, suddenly looked like she might be sick. Your Honor, I continued, the evidence shows that this conspiracy involved multiple parties, sophisticated planning, and access to both technical resources and personal information that could only have come from within our family. I was building the foundation for revelations that would reshape everything we thought we knew about the Chen family dynamics. The synthetic audio files were just the beginning. Jessica had created an entire alternate reality, complete with fake text messages, forged emails, and manufactured evidence of conversations that never happened. But to pull off a deception this comprehensive, she'd needed help. And the person who'd helped her was sitting in the front row, clutching her pearls like a lifeline. The rain outside had intensified, drumming against the courthouse windows with increasing urgency. But inside this sealed courtroom, a different kind of storm was about to break. The kind that would wash away lies, expose hidden alliances, and reveal the true cost of betrayal in the digital age. The evidence presentation. Detective Kim resumed her analysis, with renewed intensity, her fingers flying across the keyboard, as she dove deeper into the digital evidence I'd provided. The laptop screen reflected in her glasses, as she pulled up spectrograms, frequency analyses, and metadata reports that would form the technical backbone of what was about to unfold. Judge Morrison watched with the keen attention of someone who understood that they were witnessing something unprecedented in her courtroom. Your Honor, Kim said without looking up from the screen, I'm seeing patterns here that confirm Miss Chen's preliminary analysis. These audio files show clear evidence of artificial synthesis, but there's something else. The timestamps indicate that multiple files were created in batch processes, suggesting automated generation rather than individual creation. The technical language might have been lost on most people in the courtroom, but I could see understanding dawn on Judge Morrison's face. Batch processing meant planning. It meant someone had sat down with a list of fake conversations they wanted to create and systematically manufactured them using industrial-grade deception technology. I stepped forward again, this time carrying a different kind of evidence. Not papers or files, but a small digital recorder that had become the most important piece of equipment in my investigation. Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to demonstrate exactly how these synthetic recordings were created. Judge Morrison nodded, her curiosity clearly piqued. Proceed. I connected the recorder to the laptop's audio input and pulled up a software interface that most people in the courtroom had probably never seen before. VoiceForge Pro looked innocent enough on the surface, like any other audio editing program. But in the wrong hands, it was a weapon capable of destroying lives, relationships, and the very concept of truth itself. This is the exact software platform used to create the fake recordings. I explained, navigating through menus, with the familiarity of someone who'd spent weeks reverse engineering a conspiracy. It requires source audio to create a voice model, then generates new speech, based on text input. The process is remarkably sophisticated, but it leaves digital fingerprints that are impossible to completely erase. I clicked play on one of the original recordings Jessica had submitted as evidence. My father's voice filled the courtroom, warm and familiar, supposedly telling her that he wanted to change his will, that he was disappointed in my career choices, that he thought she deserved to inherit his company instead of me. This recording, I said as the audio finished, was supposedly made 3 weeks before my father's death. According to my sister, it was captured during a private conversation in his hospital room. The emotion in the synthetic voice was heartbreaking. Whoever had created it had done an exceptional job of capturing not just my father's vocal patterns, but the frailty that had crept into his speech during his final illness. It was cruel in a way that went beyond simple fraud. It was the technological resurrection of a dead man, for the purpose of destroying his living daughter. Now, I continued, pulling up a different file, I'd like you to hear the source material that was used to create this fabrication. The new audio was immediately recognizable to anyone who'd known Robert Chen. It was from a video call we'd had as a family during the early days of the pandemic, when we were all trying to stay connected despite the isolation. My father was talking about his company, about his hopes for the future, about how proud he was of all his children. The warmth in his voice was genuine, unforced, the product of a man who truly loved his family. Using VoiceForge Pro's text-to-speech synthesis, I explained, someone took approximately 30 minutes of this source material and generated over 2 hours of fake conversations. The software analyzed my father's vocal patterns, his cadence, his pronunciation quirks, and his emotional inflections, then used that data to make him say things he never said. I demonstrated the process in real time, typing a simple sentence into the software, and watching as it generated my father's voice, speaking words he'd never uttered. The effect was unsettling, even when you knew it was artificial. The technology had reached a point where the human ear could no longer reliably distinguish between real and synthetic speech. The metadata analysis, Detective Kim added, shows that the files submitted as evidence were created using this exact software platform. The digital signatures are unmistakable. But I wasn't done yet. The voice synthesis was just one layer of a deception that went much deeper than anyone in the courtroom had imagined. Your Honor, the fake audio recordings were part of a larger campaign of digital manipulation that included forged text messages, fabricated emails, and altered photographs. I pulled up a new interface on the laptop, this one showing text message threads that looked completely authentic at first glance. The green and blue bubbles, the timestamps, the delivery confirmations, everything looked exactly like genuine iPhone conversations between my father and Jessica during his final months. These text message threads, I explained, were created using commercially available software designed for creating fake screenshots for entertainment purposes. The technology is easily accessible, but the implementation here shows planning and attention to detail that goes far beyond casual use. I scrolled through conversation after conversation, each one building a narrative of a father who'd lost faith in his youngest daughter and wanted to change his will to benefit Jessica instead. The messages were emotionally devastating, full of disappointment and regret that felt completely authentic. If I hadn't known they were fake, they would have broken my heart. The timestamps on these fabricated messages, I continued, correspond exactly with times when my father was documented to be unconscious or heavily sedated. Medical records from Oregon Health and Science University show that during many of these supposed conversations, he was physically incapable of using a phone. Jessica's face had gone from pale to gray. Her attorney was scribbling notes frantically, probably trying to figure out if there was any way to salvage their case. But the evidence was overwhelming, comprehensive, and damning in a way that left no room for alternative explanations. Your Honor, I said, reaching the climax of my presentation, I've documented over 50 instances of digitally fabricated evidence, spanning a period of 4 months. The sophistication of this deception required not just technical knowledge, but intimate familiarity with our family dynamics, access to personal recordings and photographs, and detailed knowledge of my father's medical condition and treatment schedule. I paused, letting the implications sink in. This wasn't the work of a lone actor. It was a conspiracy that had required coordination, resources, and access to information that only family members could have provided. The question before this court isn't just whether these recordings are authentic, I continued. It's who had the means, motive, and opportunity to create such an elaborate deception, and why they thought they could get away with it. Judge Morrison sat in stunned silence for a long moment, processing the magnitude of what she'd just witnessed. The technology demonstration had been devastating enough, but the broader implications were staggering. If artificial intelligence could be used to fabricate such convincing evidence, what did that mean for the legal system? How could courts distinguish between real and synthetic evidence? Chen, the judge said finally, do you have evidence identifying who created these fabricated materials? I smiled for the first time that day, not with joy, but with the grim satisfaction of someone who'd spent months building an unshiftable case. Yes, Your Honor, I do. The final piece of evidence wasn't just about technical analysis or digital forensics. It was about human behavior, about the patterns people leave behind when they think they're being clever. Jessica had been methodical in her deception, but she'd also been sloppy in ways that revealed not just what she'd done, but exactly how she'd done it, and more importantly, who had helped her do it. Power dynamic shift. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted like the barometric pressure before a thunderstorm. What had begun as a straightforward inheritance dispute was transforming into something far more sinister, and everyone present could feel the change. Judge Morrison's expression had hardened from judicial skepticism to genuine alarm, while Detective Kim continued her digital excavation, with the focused intensity of an archaeologist uncovering ancient secrets. I could see Jessica calculating behind her carefully maintained facade, her mind racing through options that were rapidly disappearing. She'd built her entire case on fabricated evidence, banking on the assumption that emotional manipulation and family loyalty would carry more weight than technical analysis. She'd underestimated both the sophistication of modern digital forensics and her younger sister's expertise in exactly the field she'd chosen to weaponize. Detective Kim, Judge Morrison said, her voice carrying new authority, based on your preliminary analysis, do you believe this evidence warrants immediate investigation by federal authorities? Kim looked up from the laptop, her expression grave. Your Honor, what we're seeing here appears to constitute multiple federal crimes. Wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to defraud, and potential violations of federal cybercrime statutes. The sophistication of this operation suggests it may be part of a larger pattern of digital deception. Those words hit the courtroom like a physical force. Federal crimes. The phrase transformed everything from a family dispute into a criminal investigation that could result in prison sentences measured in decades, not years. Jessica's carefully constructed world of plausible deniability was crumbling in real time. Furthermore, Kim continued, the evidence suggests this operation required resources and expertise beyond what any individual could provide. We're looking at professional-grade voice synthesis, sophisticated metadata manipulation, and
coordinated creation of multiple forms of digital evidence. This level of deception typically indicates organized criminal activity. Marcus Wellington finally found his voice, though it cracked slightly as he spoke. Your Honor, these are extremely serious allegations being made without proper procedural safeguards. My client has a right to examine this so-called evidence with independent experts before. Your client, Judge Morrison interrupted, is now potentially facing federal criminal charges. I'm suspending these civil proceedings immediately and ordering this courtroom sealed until federal investigators can properly examine all evidence. As if summoned by her words, the side door of the courtroom opened to admit two men in dark suits who moved with the purposeful efficiency of federal agents. FBI, I realized, recognizing the subtle signs from my years working with law enforcement on cybersecurity cases. They'd been waiting outside, prepared for exactly this scenario. The lead agent, a tall man with graying temples and intelligent eyes, approached the bench with the measured stride of someone accustomed to taking control of chaotic situations. Your Honor, I'm Special Agent Michael Torres, FBI Cybercrime Division. We've been monitoring this situation at the request of Miss Sarah Chen's legal team. The revelation that I'd contacted federal authorities sent another shockwave through the courtroom. Jessica's mask finally slipped completely, her face contorting with rage and disbelief. She'd assumed this would be a simple civil matter, a family squabble that could be resolved with forged evidence and emotional manipulation. Instead, she was facing the full weight of federal law enforcement. Agent Torres, Judge Morrison said, do you have sufficient evidence to proceed with a criminal investigation? Torres accepted the laptop from Detective Kim and spent several minutes reviewing the digital evidence I'd compiled. His expression remained professionally neutral, but I could see the recognition in his eyes. He'd seen cases like this before, though probably not involving family members using AI to destroy each other. Your Honor, Torres said finally, based on preliminary review, we have sufficient evidence to open a federal investigation into wire fraud, conspiracy, and violations of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. We'll need to secure all electronic devices belonging to the subjects and conduct comprehensive forensic analysis. The word subjects hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Jessica was no longer a grieving daughter seeking justice for her father's estate. She was a federal suspect in a cybercrime investigation that could destroy her career, her reputation, and her freedom. Additionally, Torres continued, we'll need to examine the digital infrastructure used to create and distribute the fabricated evidence. This type of operation typically requires access to professional-grade software, high-end computing resources, and potentially commercial AI services that maintain detailed usage logs. I watched Jessica's face as the implications sank in. Every digital action leaves traces, breadcrumbs that can be followed back to their source. The software licenses, the computing resources, the payment records for AI services, all of it would lead directly back to whoever had orchestrated this elaborate deception. But Torres wasn't finished. Your Honor, the evidence also suggests this operation may have involved multiple participants. The coordination required to create this volume of synthetic evidence, combined with the intimate knowledge of family dynamics and medical records, indicates a conspiracy involving at least 2 individuals. The phrase multiple participants sent my mother into a panic attack. Linda Chen, who had sat through the entire morning with rigid composure, suddenly doubled over as if she'd been punched in the stomach. Her breathing became rapid and shallow, her face flushed with a combination of fear and shame that told its own story. David, my younger brother, finally broke his silence. Mom, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, what did you do? The question hung in the air like an accusation, and everyone in the courtroom turned to look at Linda Chen. She was trembling now, her perfectly manicured hands shaking as she gripped the back of the pew in front of her. The mask of maternal dignity had cracked completely, revealing the desperate woman underneath. I didn't, she began, then stopped, her voice catching in her throat. I never meant for it to go this far. Agent Torres stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. Mrs. Chen, I need to advise you that anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to remain silent, and the right to an attorney. The Miranda warning in a civil courtroom was surreal, but it drove home the magnitude of what was unfolding. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was about a mother and daughter who had conspired to use cutting-edge technology to defraud the legal system and destroy an innocent family member. Your Honor, I said, standing once again, I have additional evidence that documents the full scope of this conspiracy. Bank records, software purchases, communication logs, and payment records that trace the entire operation from conception to execution. I reached into my messenger bag one final time and withdrew a USB drive that contained the most damning evidence I'd uncovered. Months of investigation had led me to financial records that painted a picture of premeditation so comprehensive it was almost unbelievable. This drive contains documentation showing that Jessica Chen and Linda Chen jointly purchased VoiceForge Pro software, professional AI services, and high-end computing resources, specifically for the purpose of creating synthetic evidence. The paper trail spans 6 months and includes detailed communication between them about strategy, timeline, and implementation. Agent Torres accepted the USB drive with the reverence due to evidence that could make or break a federal case. The financial records would provide the smoking gun that transformed this from a case of sophisticated fraud into a conspiracy that could result in decades of federal prison time. Jessica finally found her voice, but it came out as a strangled whisper. Sarah, you don't understand. The company should have been mine. I worked for it. I earned it. You were never even interested in Dad's business until he was dying. The admission hit the courtroom like a confession, revealing the motive that had driven her to such extreme measures. This wasn't about justice or family loyalty, it was about entitlement, about a woman who believed she deserved something that had been given to someone else. Miss Chen, Agent Torres said to Jessica, I'm placing you under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, identity theft, and violations of federal cybercrime statutes. The handcuffs clicked with the finality of a closing door. Jessica Chen, successful marketing executive and eldest daughter of the Chen family, was now a federal prisoner facing charges that could result in 20 years in prison. Her carefully constructed life had collapsed in the span of a single morning, brought down by the very technology she'd tried to use as a weapon. As the agents led Jessica away, she turned back to look at me one final time. The hatred in her eyes was pure and undiluted. But underneath it, I saw something else. Recognition. She finally understood that she'd picked a fight with someone who knew exactly how to win it. The courtroom began to empty as Agent Torres coordinated with local law enforcement to secure evidence and interview witnesses. David sat alone in the gallery, staring at his hands, probably wondering how his family had fallen apart so completely. My mother remained hunched over in her seat, sobbing quietly as the full weight of her choices finally settled on her shoulders. And me, I stood in the sudden quiet of the nearly empty courtroom, feeling something I hadn't experienced in months. Not triumph, not vindication, but simple relief. The truth was finally out, the lies had been exposed, and justice was beginning to take its course. The power dynamics that had defined the Chen family for decades had shifted permanently. Jessica's authority was gone, my mother's manipulation had been exposed, and the inheritance that had started this whole nightmare suddenly seemed far less important than the family we'd lost in the process. But at least now, everyone would know the truth. And in the digital age, sometimes that's the most powerful victory of all. Audience connection bridge. The weight of what had just transpired in that Portland courtroom settled over me like a heavy blanket as I walked through the courthouse corridors. The marble floors echoed with the soft clicks of my heels, each step taking me further from the chaos I'd just orchestrated and closer to a truth I'd been carrying alone for months. Federal agents bustled past me, their arms full of evidence bags and digital devices that would soon reveal the full scope of my sister's deception. But for now, in this quiet moment between storm and calm, I found myself thinking about something Agent Torres had said during the proceedings. This wasn't an isolated incident. Cases like mine were becoming more common across the country as artificial intelligence technology became more accessible and more sophisticated. Families were being torn apart by deepfake videos, synthetic audio recordings, and fabricated digital evidence that could fool even trained professionals. The FBI's cybercrime division had seen a 300% increase in AI-related fraud cases over the past 2 years, and most of them shared disturbing similarities to what Jessica had done to me. I thought about the other victims out there, people who might be sitting in their own living rooms right now, staring at fabricated evidence of conversations that never happened, questioning their own memories and sanity. People whose siblings or parents or children had weaponized technology against them in ways that would have been impossible just a few years ago. The democratization of AI had brought incredible benefits to society, but it had also armed malicious actors with tools that could destroy lives with unprecedented efficiency. Standing there in the courthouse hallway, watching federal agents carry away devices that contained the digital fragments of my family's destruction, I realized that my story wasn't really about inheritance or sibling rivalry. It was about something much larger and more terrifying. It was about living in an age where your own voice could be turned against you, where the people closest to you had access to technologies that could rewrite reality itself. The text messages on my phone had been lighting up since news of Jessica's arrest broke. Colleagues from CloudTech Solutions expressing shock and support. Neighbors from the Hawthorne district who'd watched our family drama play out in the local press. Industry contacts who understood the technical implications of what Jessica had accomplished and were horrified by the personal cost. But mixed in with the support were messages from strangers, people who'd heard about the case and wanted to share their own stories of digital betrayal. A woman in Seattle whose ex-husband had used deepfake technology to create compromising videos that nearly destroyed her custody case. A man in Austin whose business partner had fabricated email exchanges to steal clients and intellectual property. A teenager in Miami whose classmates had used AI voice synthesis to create fake audio of her saying terrible things about her friends. The stories kept coming, each one a variation on the same theme: trust destroyed by technology, relationships shattered by artificial intelligence wielded with malicious intent. I found myself wondering how many of these victims had the technical knowledge to fight back the way I had. How many had access to digital forensics experts who could unravel the synthetic evidence being used against them? How many had simply accepted their fate, believing that the fabricated conversations and documents were real because they looked and sounded so convincing? The democratization of AI technology had created a new kind of asymmetric warfare, one where technical knowledge was the only effective defense against sophisticated attacks. Jessica had assumed that her marketing background and access to commercial AI tools would be enough to fool the legal system. She'd never considered that her target was someone who spent her days hunting down exactly these kinds of digital deceptions. But what about everyone else? What about the victims who didn't happen to work in cybersecurity, who didn't have years of experience with digital forensics, who couldn't distinguish between authentic and synthetic evidence? They were defenseless against attacks that were becoming more common and more sophisticated every day. As I walked through downtown Portland, past the food trucks and coffee shops that had become the backdrop for my personal nightmare, I thought about the broader implications of what had happened in that courtroom. Judge Morrison had been forced to grapple with evidence that challenged fundamental assumptions about truth and authenticity. The legal system, built on centuries of precedent and procedure, was suddenly confronting technologies that could make anyone say anything at any time. How do courts verify evidence when the tools for creating fake evidence are available to anyone with a credit card and an internet connection? How do juries evaluate testimony when voices can be synthesized, images can be generated, and entire conversations can be fabricated with software that costs less than a month of cable television? These weren't theoretical questions anymore. They were practical challenges that every courthouse in America would soon be facing. The human cost of this technological revolution was staggering. Families were being destroyed not by traditional conflicts over money or power, but by relatives who'd learned to weaponize artificial intelligence against each other. Children were losing trust in their parents, spouses were questioning decades of marriage, and siblings were discovering that the people they'd grown up with were capable of unimaginable cruelty when armed with the right software. I thought about David, my younger brother, who'd sat in that courtroom watching his family implode in real time. He'd grown up believing that our mother was the moral center of our household, the one who kept us grounded and connected despite our different personalities and ambitions. Now he was learning that she'd been an active participant in a conspiracy to destroy me using technologies he probably didn't even understand. How do you process that kind of betrayal? How do you rebuild trust when the very foundations of your family have been revealed to be lies? The psychological impact of AI-enabled deception went beyond simple fraud or theft. It attacked the victim's sense of reality, their ability to trust their own memories and perceptions. When someone uses traditional methods to lie about you, you can at least rely on your own recollections of events. But when they use artificial intelligence to make you appear to say things you never said, to create evidence of conversations that never happened, they're not just attacking your reputation, they're attacking your sanity. I'd spent months questioning my own memories of interactions with my father, wondering if I'd somehow misunderstood his intentions or forgotten crucial conversations. The synthetic audio files were so convincing, so emotionally authentic, that they'd made me doubt experiences I knew were real. That kind of psychological warfare was perhaps more devastating than any financial loss could ever be. The accessibility of AI technology meant that these attacks could come from anywhere, perpetrated by anyone with basic computer skills and malicious intent. Jessica hadn't needed to hire professional criminals or learn complex hacking techniques. She'd simply purchased commercial software and followed online tutorials to create evidence that nearly destroyed my life. The barrier to entry for this kind of digital terrorism was frighteningly low. As I reached my car in the courthouse parking lot, my phone buzzed with another message from a stranger who'd heard about the case. This one was from a mother in Denver, whose teenage daughter had used AI to create fake audio recordings of her saying abusive things to her other children. The family was in therapy, trying to rebuild relationships that had been shattered by synthetic evidence that sounded absolutely real. The message ended with a question that haunted me. How do we protect ourselves from people we love when they have access to technology that can make us say anything they want us to say? I didn't have an answer. The technical solutions existed: digital forensics, blockchain verification, biometric authentication, but they required expertise and resources that most people didn't have. The legal system was struggling to keep pace with technological developments that seemed to accelerate every month. And the social implications were staggering as families and communities grappled with the erosion of trust in an age where seeing and hearing were no longer believing. Sitting in my car as the rain continued to fall on Portland's streets, I realized that my victory in that courtroom was just the beginning of a much larger battle. Jessica and my mother would face justice for their crimes, but the technology they'd used would only become more accessible and more sophisticated. Other families would face similar attacks, and many of them wouldn't have the knowledge or resources to fight back effectively. The democratization of artificial intelligence had given humanity incredible tools for creativity, productivity, and problem solving. But it had also weaponized deception in ways that threatened the very foundations of truth and trust in human relationships. My story was just one example of a phenomenon that was spreading across society like a digital plague, destroying families and communities one fabricated conversation at a time. Foundation setting. The Chen family had always been complicated, but it wasn't until after my father's funeral that I began to understand just how deep the fault lines ran beneath our carefully maintained surface of middle-class respectability. Robert Chen had immigrated to the United States in the early 1980s, with nothing but a computer science degree from National Taiwan University, and an unshakable belief that technology could solve any problem. He'd worked his way up from entry-level programming positions to eventually founding Chen Analytics, a small but innovative company that specialized in AI-driven business intelligence software. Our house in the Hawthorne district had been the headquarters for his dreams long before he could afford proper office space. I remembered being 8 years old, and tiptoeing around servers humming in what should have been our dining room, watching my father work 18-hour days to build something that could provide for his family while advancing the field he loved. Those early years had been marked by financial uncertainty, but also by a sense of shared purpose. We were all part of Dad's grand experiment, his belief that artificial intelligence could democratize business insights and level the playing field for smaller companies. Jessica, being the oldest, had absorbed those early lessons about entrepreneurship and ambition, but she'd interpreted them through her own lens of image and social status. Even as a teenager, she'd been embarrassed by our father's work-from-home setup, by the way our house smelled like hot electronics and coffee, by the parade of eccentric programmers and data scientists who treated our kitchen table like a conference room. She'd wanted the respectability that came with traditional success: corner offices, expense accounts, recognition from the Portland business community. David and I had taken different lessons from those formative years. David had retreated into books and academics, finding safety in subjects that didn't require him to navigate the complex dynamics of family ambition. He'd always been the peacekeeper, the one who changed the subject when dinner conversations turned tense, who found excuses to leave the room when Jessica and I argued about our father's priorities. I'd been fascinated by the technical aspects of what Dad was building, while Jessica rolled her eyes at his explanations of machine learning algorithms and data visualization techniques. I'd peppered him with questions about how the software actually worked, why certain approaches were more effective than others, how artificial intelligence could be trained to recognize patterns that humans might miss. Those conversations had shaped my career path long before I understood their significance. Our mother, Linda, had occupied a strange middle ground in the family hierarchy. She'd supported Dad's entrepreneurial efforts while simultaneously worrying about their financial and social implications. She'd wanted him to succeed, but she'd also wanted that success to look like something their neighbors would recognize and respect. The tension between supporting innovation and craving conventional achievement had colored every major family decision for as long as I could remember. The company's breakthrough had come when I was in high school, a period when Jessica was already away at college studying marketing and business administration. Dad had developed a predictive analytics platform that could forecast consumer behavior with unprecedented accuracy, and suddenly Chen Analytics was fielding acquisition offers from major tech companies. The money had validated his decades of work, but it had also introduced new tensions into our family dynamic. Jessica had returned from college with ideas about professionalizing the company, bringing in traditional management structures and marketing strategies that reflected her business school education. She'd been critical of Dad's informal approach to running the company, his tendency to prioritize innovation over profit margins, his willingness to take on interesting projects even if they weren't immediately lucrative. Those criticisms had created a rift that widened over the years. Dad had valued Jessica's business acumen and had gradually given her more responsibility for the company's operations, but he'd never fully embraced her vision of transforming Chen Analytics into a conventional enterprise software company. He'd remained committed to the startup culture that had defined the company's early years, the sense that they were solving interesting problems, rather than simply maximizing revenue. My own relationship with the company had been more complicated. I'd studied computer science in college, following in Dad's footsteps, but specializing in cybersecurity, rather than business intelligence. I joined Chen Analytics as a summer intern during my sophomore year, expecting to learn about the family business from the inside. Instead, I discovered that my interests lay in protecting systems rather than exploiting data, in defending against digital threats rather than creating new ways to analyze consumer behavior. After graduation, I'd taken a position with CloudTech Solutions, a cybersecurity firm that specialized in protecting small and medium-sized businesses from the kinds of digital threats that were becoming increasingly common. The work was challenging and meaningful, but it had also created distance between me and the family company. Jessica had interpreted my career choice as a rejection of Dad's legacy, while I'd seen it as a natural evolution of the same principles that had driven his work. The irony wasn't lost on me that my expertise in cybersecurity had ultimately been the weapon I'd used to expose Jessica's conspiracy. The skills I'd developed hunting down digital criminals and analyzing synthetic media had prepared me perfectly for the moment when my own family became the threat I needed to neutralize. Dad's illness had intensified all these underlying tensions. As his condition worsened, Jessica had begun positioning herself as the natural successor to lead Chen Analytics, arguing that her business background and operational experience made her the obvious choice. She'd presented detailed plans for expanding the company, acquiring competitors, and developing new product lines that would increase market share and revenue. But Dad had surprised everyone with his final decision. Rather than leaving the company to Jessica, who'd expected to inherit what she saw as her birthright, he'd divided his assets in a way that reflected his complex understanding of each of his children's strengths and interests. Jessica had received significant financial assets and a stake in the company's future profits, but control of Chen Analytics had gone to me, along with the intellectual property and technological innovations that formed the core of his legacy. The will had been clear about his reasoning. He'd written a lengthy letter explaining that he believed Jessica's business skills were better suited to larger, more established companies, while my technical background and understanding of emerging cybersecurity threats positioned me to guide Chen Analytics through the challenges of an increasingly dangerous digital landscape. He'd recognized that the company's future depended not just on maximizing current revenue, but on protecting the technological innovations that gave it competitive advantages. Jessica had been devastated by the decision, but I'd initially assumed her disappointment would fade as she found other opportunities to apply her considerable talents. She'd quickly landed a senior position with Pinnacle Marketing Agency, one of Portland's most prestigious firms, and had seemed to be building a successful independent career. I'd thought the inheritance issue was settled, that we could all move forward with our lives despite the lingering tensions. I'd been wrong about everything. Jessica hadn't accepted Dad's decision. She'd simply gone underground with her resentment, using the months after his death to plan and execute a conspiracy that would have been impossible without her intimate knowledge of our family dynamics and her access to the technological tools that Dad's success had made affordable. The foundation of her deception had been built on a deep understanding of our family's vulnerabilities. She'd known that I would question my own memories if presented with convincing evidence of conversations I couldn't recall. She'd understood that our mother's desire for family harmony would make her an eager accomplice in any plan that promised to correct what she saw as an unfair distribution of Dad's legacy. And she'd recognized that the legal system's unfamiliarity with AI-generated evidence would give her fabricated recordings an aura of authenticity that would be difficult to challenge. The tragedy was that Dad's vision for Chen Analytics had been fundamentally sound. The company's focus on ethical AI development and cybersecurity-conscious business intelligence had positioned it perfectly for an era when data privacy and algorithmic transparency were becoming critical competitive advantages. Jessica's plan to transform it into a conventional enterprise software company would have destroyed exactly the qualities that made it valuable. But beyond the business implications, Jessica's conspiracy had revealed something darker about the American family in the digital age. The same technologies that Dad had helped develop were being weaponized by his own daughter to destroy the family he'd worked so hard to provide for. The democratization of artificial intelligence that he'd championed had given Jessica the tools she needed to fabricate evidence, manipulate emotions, and nearly succeed in stealing everything he'd built. Sitting in that courthouse parking lot, processing the implications of what had just unfolded, I realized that our family's story was a microcosm of larger societal challenges. The rapid advancement of AI technology was outpacing our cultural and legal frameworks for dealing with its misuse. Families across the country were probably facing similar conflicts as relatives discovered new ways to weaponize digital tools against each other. The Chen family's foundation had been built on Robert Chen's belief that technology could bring people together, solve problems, and create opportunities for success and fulfillment. Jessica's conspiracy had perverted those same beliefs, using advanced technology to tear the family apart from the inside. The tools that were supposed to democratize opportunity had become weapons in a family war that had destroyed relationships, traumatized loved ones, and nearly succeeded in rewriting history itself. The catalyst event, the phone call, came on a Tuesday morning in March, exactly 6 weeks after we'd buried my father in the rain-soaked cemetery, overlooking the Columbia River. I was in my office at CloudTech Solutions, analyzing malware samples from a
sophisticated phishing campaign that had targeted several of our clients when my personal phone buzzed with an unknown local number. I almost ignored it, but something about the timing felt urgent in a way that made me set aside my work and answer. Sarah Chen. The voice was professional, crisp,
belonging to someone accustomed to delivering important information efficiently. Yes, this is Sarah. This is Margaret Hoffman from Hoffman, Pierce and Associates. I'm calling regarding your father's estate. There's been a development that requires immediate attention. My stomach dropped. Dad's will had been probated months earlier, the assets distributed according to his clearly stated wishes. Jessica had received her inheritance, David had his trust fund, and I'd taken ownership of both the house and Chen Analytics. There shouldn't have been any developments requiring immediate attention. What kind of development? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer would be something I didn't want to hear. I'm afraid there's been a legal challenge filed by your sister Jessica and your mother Linda. They're contesting the validity of your father's will based on newly discovered evidence suggesting undue influence and potential fraud. The words hit me like a physical blow. Newly discovered evidence. In my line of work, that phrase usually meant someone had been planning their attack for weeks or months, carefully timing the revelation of information to maximize its impact. Jessica wasn't acting impulsively, she was executing a strategy. What kind of evidence? I managed to ask, though my voice sounded strange to my own ears. Audio recordings, text message conversations, and email exchanges that allegedly document your systematic manipulation of your father during his final illness. I'm required to inform you that you have 30 days to respond to the challenge, and I'd strongly recommend retaining legal counsel immediately. After Margaret hung up, I sat in my office staring at my computer screen without seeing it. The malware analysis that had seemed important 20 minutes earlier was now irrelevant background noise compared to the reality that my own family was waging legal warfare against me. But even as the shock settled into my bones, my analytical mind was already working, processing the implications of what Margaret had told me. Audio recordings. In 2024, that phrase carried very different weight than it would have even 5 years earlier. The technology for generating synthetic speech had advanced to the point where convincing fake audio could be created by anyone with basic technical skills and access to commercial software. Text message conversations could be fabricated using readily available apps designed for creating realistic screenshots. Email exchanges could be backdated, manipulated, and presented as authentic evidence of communications that never occurred. Jessica knew I worked in cybersecurity. She knew I specialized in detecting and analyzing digital deceptions. She had to know that I would immediately suspect artificial generation of any audio or digital evidence presented against me. Which meant either she was incredibly stupid, or she was incredibly confident that her fabricated evidence was sophisticated enough to fool not just the legal system, but also a cybersecurity expert who made her living hunting down exactly these kinds of digital lies. The third possibility was the most disturbing. She actually had authentic evidence of conversations and communications that I'd somehow forgotten or repressed. Dad's final months had been a blur of hospital visits, medication schedules, and difficult conversations about end-of-life care. Maybe there had been moments when I'd said things I regretted, when grief and stress had led me to push too hard for decisions that favored my interests over Jessica's. But even as I considered that possibility, I knew it was wrong. My relationship with Dad during his illness had been complicated but honest. We'd talked about the company's future, about his hopes for each of his children, about his regrets and disappointments. But I'd never pressured him to change his will, never suggested that Jessica didn't deserve her inheritance, never tried to manipulate his decisions through emotional manipulation or false information. The more I thought about Margaret's call, the more certain I became that Jessica was bluffing with fabricated evidence. But recognizing a bluff and proving it in court were very different challenges. If she'd invested in high-quality voice synthesis technology and professional digital manipulation services, her fake evidence might be sophisticated enough to fool judges and juries who lacked the technical background to recognize artificial generation. I spent the rest of that day in a strange state of hyper-alert calm, the same mental mode I entered when analyzing particularly dangerous malware samples. Emotion was a luxury I couldn't afford. What I needed was systematic analysis of the threat I was facing and methodical preparation of countermeasures. Jessica had declared war using digital weapons, and I intended to win that war using every tool and technique I'd learned in a decade of cybersecurity work. The first step was understanding exactly what evidence she'd fabricated and how she'd done it. That meant retaining legal counsel who understood both traditional estate law and the emerging challenges of synthetic media in legal proceedings. It meant assembling a team of digital forensics experts who could analyze audio files, examine metadata, and trace the origins of manipulated communications. But more than anything, it meant preparing for the possibility that Jessica's conspiracy went deeper than simple inheritance fraud. The sophistication required to create convincing synthetic evidence suggested professional assistance or extensive technical knowledge. Jessica had a marketing background, not a computer science degree. If she'd managed to generate fake audio that could fool casual listeners, she'd either received help from someone with serious technical skills, or she'd invested significant time and money in learning advanced digital manipulation techniques. The timeline bothered me most of all. 6 weeks after Dad's funeral was too soon for a spontaneous decision to challenge the will, but too late for evidence that should have been available during the original probate proceedings. Jessica had been planning this attack since before Dad died, waiting for the right moment to deploy fabricated evidence that would maximize its emotional and legal impact. That evening I drove to the house in the Hawthorne district that had become the center of our family's legal battle. The craftsman-style building looked exactly the same as it had when Dad was alive, but walking through rooms that still smelled like his coffee and aftershave felt like visiting a crime scene. Every conversation we'd had in these rooms was now subject to potential misrepresentation, every private moment vulnerable to digital fabrication and legal weaponization. I found myself standing in Dad's home office, looking at the desk where he'd written his final will and the letter explaining his decisions about the inheritance. The irony was devastating. He'd left me control of Chen Analytics, because he'd believed my cybersecurity background would help protect the company from digital threats. He'd never imagined that the most dangerous digital threat would come from within his own family. My phone buzzed with a text message from David. Just heard about the legal challenge. Can we talk? 20 minutes later, my younger brother was sitting in Dad's kitchen, his face pale and his hands shaking slightly as he processed the implications of what Jessica and our mother had done. David had always been the family peacekeeper, the one who avoided conflict and tried to find middle ground between competing personalities. The idea that our mother was actively participating in legal warfare against me was shattering his fundamental assumptions about family loyalty and maternal protection. I don't understand, he said, staring at the coffee mug he'd been holding without drinking from for 10 minutes. Mom was there when Dad explained his decisions about the will. She heard him talk about why he wanted you to have the company. How can she now claim you manipulated him? Because she believes Jessica deserves it more than I do, I replied, though saying it out loud made it sound even more surreal. And because she's probably convinced herself that Dad wasn't thinking clearly during his final months. David shook his head. Dad was sharp right up until the end. You know that. I know that. Everyone who spent time with him during his illness knows that. His doctors, his nurses, his friends, they all saw how mentally clear he remained even when his body was failing. Medical records don't matter if Jessica has audio recordings of me supposedly pressuring Dad to change his will, I said. Juries believe their ears more than they believe paperwork. But you never did that. I was there for most of those conversations. You were supportive, caring, respectful of his decisions. You never even brought up the inheritance until after he'd already explained his reasoning. David's certainty was comforting, but it also highlighted the central challenge I was facing. The people who knew me best understood that Jessica's allegations were false, but they wouldn't be the ones deciding the legal challenge. Judges and juries who'd never met any of us would be evaluating evidence that could be artificially generated to support any narrative Jessica wanted to construct. The conversation with David crystallized something I'd been avoiding since Margaret's phone call. This wasn't just about inheritance or money, it was about truth itself in an age when technology could make anyone appear to say anything at any time. Jessica's legal challenge was really an attack on the concept of authentic evidence, a test of whether sophisticated digital deception could overwhelm objective reality in American courtrooms. Over the following weeks, as I prepared my defense against Jessica's challenge, I began to understand the true scope of what she'd accomplished. The evidence she'd submitted to the court wasn't just a few isolated audio files, it was a comprehensive alternate history of Dad's final months. Complete with fabricated conversations, manipulated text messages, and forged email exchanges that painted a picture of systematic emotional manipulation and financial coercion. The sophistication of her deception was breathtaking in its thoroughness and terrifying in its implications. If artificial intelligence could be used to create such convincing false evidence, what did that mean for the legal system's ability to distinguish truth from fiction? How many other families were facing similar attacks using technologies that most people didn't understand and couldn't detect? The catalyst event of Margaret's phone call had set in motion a chain of revelations that would ultimately expose not just Jessica's conspiracy, but the broader vulnerability of truth itself in the digital age. The Chen family's private war was about to become a test case for how American society would cope with the weaponization of artificial intelligence against the very foundations of trust and authenticity that held our legal and social systems together. Deceptive calm period. The weeks following Margaret Hoffman's devastating phone call settled into a routine that felt almost normal, if you didn't think too hard about the legal storm gathering on the horizon. I threw myself into my work at CloudTech Solutions with the kind of focused intensity that my colleagues probably mistook for professional dedication. In reality, I was using cybersecurity analysis as a form of meditation, a way to keep my mind sharp and analytical while the rest of my world threatened to collapse into chaos. Every morning, I would arrive at the office before dawn, brewing coffee in the break room and settling into my cubicle while the building was still quiet and dark. The malware samples and phishing schemes I analyzed during those early hours provided a strange comfort. Digital threats were clean, logical problems with technical solutions. Unlike family betrayals, cyber attacks followed predictable patterns that could be mapped, understood, and neutralized through systematic analysis. My apartment in the Pearl District had become a fortress of normalcy where I could pretend that nothing had changed. I maintained my usual routines: grocery shopping at the Saturday farmers market, yoga classes at the studio down the street, evening walks along the Willamette River as the sun set behind the West Hills. Neighbors who waved from their balconies had no idea that I was living under the shadow of accusations that could destroy my reputation and strip away everything my father had worked to build. The hardest part was the silence from my family. Jessica hadn't spoken to me since filing the legal challenge, communicating only through attorneys in the formal language of depositions and discovery requests. My mother had retreated into a bubble of willful denial, avoiding my calls and pretending that the legal proceedings were just a misunderstanding that would resolve itself without requiring her to choose sides. David remained caught in the middle, loyal to me but desperate to avoid the family civil war that was tearing apart everything he'd once considered stable and secure. I found myself developing new habits that reflected my growing paranoia about digital surveillance and manipulation. I started recording all my phone conversations, documenting my daily activities with time-stamped photos, and maintaining detailed logs of every digital interaction I had with family members or legal representatives. If Jessica could fabricate evidence of conversations that never happened, I needed to create an unshakable record of conversations that actually did occur. The legal preparation process was both exhausting and strangely reassuring. Monica Rivera, the attorney I'd retained to handle my defense, specialized in estate litigation involving complex technical evidence. She understood both the traditional legal framework for probate disputes and the emerging challenges of synthetic media in courtroom proceedings. Our strategy sessions felt like military planning operations, complete with flowcharts, mapping out Jessica's likely arguments and countermeasures we could deploy against fabricated evidence. Monica had recommended Dr. James Park, a digital forensics expert from Oregon Health and Science University, who'd worked on several high-profile cases involving deepfake videos and AI-generated audio. Dr. Park spent hours with me, explaining the technical details of voice synthesis technology and the forensic techniques that could be used to detect artificial generation. His analysis of Jessica's submitted evidence would be crucial to my defense, but he'd warned me that sophisticated voice cloning was becoming increasingly difficult to distinguish from authentic recordings. The waiting was the worst part. Jessica's legal team had 30 days to submit their complete evidence package, and every day that passed brought new anxiety about what they might have fabricated. I found myself analyzing every interaction I'd had with my father during his final months, trying to remember exact conversations and identify potential vulnerabilities that could be exploited through synthetic manipulation. Sleep became elusive, interrupted by dreams where my father's voice accused me of manipulation and greed. The synthetic audio Jessica had created was so convincing that it had begun to infect my own memories, making me question conversations I knew had happened and doubt my recollections of events I'd experienced firsthand. The psychological impact of AI-generated deception went beyond simple fraud. It was an attack on the victim's fundamental sense of reality and self-knowledge. During those quiet weeks, I began researching the broader implications of synthetic media technology and its impact on legal proceedings. Academic papers and industry reports painted a disturbing picture of an emerging crisis in evidence authentication. Courts across the country were struggling with cases involving deepfake videos, AI-generated documents, and fabricated audio recordings that could fool even trained professionals. The legal system's traditional reliance on photographic and audio evidence was being undermined by technologies that could create convincing false evidence with minimal effort and expense. I discovered that the FBI's cybercrime division had established a new task force specifically focused on synthetic media fraud, recognizing that AI-generated deception was becoming a significant threat to everything from criminal justice to national security. The democratization of powerful AI tools meant that sophisticated attacks that once required state-level resources could now be carried out by individuals with basic technical skills and access to commercial software platforms. The irony of my situation wasn't lost on me. I'd spent my career protecting organizations from digital threats, but I'd never considered that the most dangerous attack might come from within my own family. Jessica had weaponized the same technologies that I helped my clients defend against, turning my expertise into a double-edged sword that cut both ways in our legal battle. My work at CloudTech Solutions provided both distraction and preparation for the coming legal fight. Several of our clients had been targeted by sophisticated social engineering attacks that used AI-generated voices to impersonate executives and authorize fraudulent financial transactions. The techniques were remarkably similar to what Jessica had done, using voice synthesis to create false evidence of authorization and consent. One case particularly haunted me: a small manufacturing company whose CFO had received a phone call from someone claiming to be the CEO, requesting an urgent wire transfer to cover an unexpected acquisition opportunity. The voice was perfect, down to the CEO's distinctive speech patterns and regional accent. Only later did they discover that the real CEO had been in surgery during the supposed phone call, and that criminals had used publicly available video recordings from corporate presentations to train an AI model that could impersonate his voice with devastating accuracy. The psychological manipulation tactics used in that attack were identical to what Jessica was doing to me. The fabricated evidence wasn't just about creating false proof of events, it was about undermining the victim's confidence in their own perceptions and memories. When you can't trust your own ears, when technology can make anyone appear to say anything, the very foundations of human communication begin to crumble. I started attending support groups for victims of family fraud, finding a community of people who understood the unique trauma of being betrayed by relatives who'd weaponized legal and financial systems against them. Their stories were heartbreaking: adult children who'd drained elderly parents' savings accounts, siblings who'd forged documents to steal inheritances, spouses who'd hidden assets during divorce proceedings using sophisticated financial manipulation schemes. But none of them had faced attacks using artificial intelligence to fabricate evidence of conversations that never occurred. My situation was unprecedented in its technological sophistication, a glimpse into a future where family conflicts would be fought with digital weapons that could rewrite history itself. The deceptive calm of those weeks was punctuated by small victories and setbacks that kept me constantly off balance. Dr. Park's preliminary analysis of Jessica's audio evidence had identified several technical anomalies that suggested artificial generation, but he'd warned that definitive proof would require access to the original source files and metadata that Jessica's legal team was unlikely to provide voluntarily. Monica had filed discovery motions requesting detailed information about how the audio recordings had been obtained and stored, but Jessica's attorneys were fighting those requests with the kind of aggressive tactics that suggested they had something to hide. The legal maneuvering was complex and time-consuming, but it was also revealing patterns that supported my suspicion that the evidence against me had been artificially generated. David visited me several times during this period, struggling with his own guilt and confusion about the family dynamics that had led to our current crisis. He'd been present for many of the conversations that Jessica claimed were evidence of my manipulation, and his memories contradicted the narrative being constructed by her legal team. But eyewitness testimony from family members was complicated by the obvious bias and emotional investment that everyone had in the outcome. My mother remained conspicuously absent from these discussions, maintaining her alliance with Jessica while avoiding direct confrontation with me. Her silence was perhaps more painful than Jessica's open hostility, because it represented a betrayal of the maternal protection I'd always taken for granted. Linda Chen had chosen sides in a war I'd never wanted to fight, and her choice had been to support the daughter who was willing to use any means necessary to get what she wanted. The quiet weeks before the storm were also a time of profound reflection about the nature of truth and family in the digital age. I'd grown up believing that families were bound together by shared experiences, common memories, and mutual loyalty that transcended temporary conflicts over money or property. Jessica's legal challenge had shattered those assumptions, revealing that even the closest relationships could be weaponized when one party was willing to embrace technologies that could fabricate evidence and rewrite history. The democratization of AI tools meant that anyone could now wage sophisticated information warfare against their enemies, creating false evidence that could destroy reputations, steal assets, and manipulate legal proceedings. The barriers to entry for this kind of digital terrorism were frighteningly low, requiring nothing more than commercial software and basic technical knowledge that could be acquired through online tutorials and public documentation. As the 30-day deadline for Jessica's evidence submission approached, I felt like a soldier preparing for a battle that would determine not just my personal future, but the broader question of whether truth could survive in an age of artificial intelligence. The techniques she'd used to attack me would inevitably be replicated by other malicious actors, creating a cascade of synthetic media fraud that could undermine everything from criminal justice to democratic governance. The deceptive calm was ending, and the real war was about to begin. The full attack launch. The evidence package arrived on a gray Thursday morning in April, delivered by courier to Monica Rivera's office in downtown Portland with the kind of ceremonial formality that suggested Jessica's legal team understood the historical significance of what they were submitting. 347 pages of documentation, accompanied by digital files containing over 6 hours of audio recordings, text message screenshots, email printouts, and photographic evidence that painted a picture of systematic manipulation so comprehensive it took my breath away. Monica called me within an hour of receiving the package, her voice carrying a mixture of professional concern and personal outrage that told me everything I needed to know about the sophistication of Jessica's attack. "Sarah, you need to see this immediately. Cancel whatever you're doing today and get down here. This is bigger than we anticipated." I left CloudTech Solutions in the middle of analyzing a ransomware attack, telling my supervisor that a family emergency required my immediate attention. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was abandoning the analysis of one sophisticated digital attack to confront another that had been launched by my own sister using technologies that were becoming increasingly accessible to anyone with malicious intent and basic technical skills. Monica's conference room had been transformed into a war room, with printed documents spread across every available surface and multiple laptops displaying audio waveforms, spectrograms, and metadata analysis reports. Dr. James Park was already there, his expression grim as he worked through the digital files that formed the core of Jessica's fabricated evidence. "The scope is unprecedented," Monica said without preamble as I entered the room. "Your sister hasn't just created a few fake recordings. She's constructed an entire alternate history of your father's final 6 months, complete with supporting documentation that would convince anyone who isn't specifically trained in digital forensics." She handed me a thick folder containing printed transcripts of the audio recordings, and I felt my stomach drop as I read the first few pages. These weren't simple conversations about inheritance or family dynamics, they were detailed, emotionally manipulative exchanges where my synthetic voice supposedly pressured my dying father into changing his will, threatened to abandon him if he didn't comply with my demands, and systematically undermined Jessica's relationship with him through lies and character assassination. The fabricated conversations were psychologically sophisticated, incorporating real details about family history, medical treatments, and personal relationships that only someone with intimate knowledge of our family dynamics could have known. My synthetic voice expressed frustration with Jessica's career choices, complained about her lack of technical understanding, and suggested that she was more interested in social status than in carrying forward Dad's technological legacy. How did she know these details? I asked, though part of me already suspected the answer. "That's the most disturbing aspect," Dr. Park replied, looking up from his spectral analysis. "The conversations reference private family discussions, medical information that should have been confidential, and personal details that suggest access to text messages, emails, and possibly recorded phone calls. Either your sister has been conducting surveillance on your family for months, or she's had help from someone with access to your personal communications." The implications hit me like a physical blow. Jessica hadn't just fabricated evidence, she'd conducted comprehensive intelligence gathering that would have required either professional surveillance capabilities or assistance from someone who had legitimate access to family communications and medical records. The technical sophistication combined with the intimate knowledge of family dynamics suggested a conspiracy that went far beyond a simple inheritance dispute. Monica walked me through the supporting documentation that Jessica's team had submitted alongside the audio evidence. Bank records showing suspicious financial transactions between my accounts and my father's during his final months, though I knew I'd never made such transfers. Email exchanges between me and business associates, discussing strategies for managing my father's decision-making during his illness, conversations that I knew had never occurred. Text message threads showing me coordinating with healthcare providers to limit Jessica's access to information about Dad's condition. Every piece of supporting evidence was carefully crafted to corroborate the narrative established by the synthetic audio recordings. The financial records showed dates and amounts that corresponded with conversations where my fabricated voice supposedly discussed using economic leverage to influence my father's decisions. The email exchanges referenced specific details mentioned in the fake recordings. The text messages provided additional context that made the overall deception more convincing to anyone who wasn't specifically looking for signs of artificial generation. The level of coordination required for this deception is staggering, Dr. Park explained, pulling up technical analysis charts on his laptop. We're not dealing with amateur hour voice cloning here. The audio synthesis uses advanced neural networks trained on substantial source material. The metadata has been carefully scrubbed to hide traces of artificial generation, and the supporting documentation shows professional-grade forgery techniques. He clicked through spectrograms that revealed the technical fingerprints of AI-generated speech, pointing out frequency patterns and harmonic distortions that were invisible to casual listeners, but unmistakable to trained forensic analysts. The voice synthesis technology was commercial-grade software, probably VoiceForge Pro, or a similar platform, but it had been
implemented with a level of sophistication that suggested either extensive technical training or professional assistance. The concerning thing, Dr. Park continued, is how they obtained the source material for voice training. Creating convincing synthetic speech requires substantial audio samples of the target's natural speech patterns. We're talking about hours of recorded conversation, not just a few brief clips from family videos. The implication was chilling. Jessica had somehow obtained extensive recordings of my voice, probably through covert surveillance or by repurposing legitimate recordings from business meetings, phone calls, or family gatherings. The thought that she'd been planning this attack for months, systematically collecting audio samples while pretending to maintain normal family relationships, revealed a level of calculating cruelty that I'd never imagined possible. Monica spread out financial documents that told their own story of premeditation and conspiracy. Credit card records showing purchases of professional audio software, payments to AI services companies, and consulting fees paid to digital marketing firms that specialized in synthetic media production. The paper trail stretched back 8 months, beginning shortly after Dad's cancer diagnosis and continuing through his death and the subsequent probate proceedings. Your sister spent over $40,000 on this deception, Monica said, her voice tight with controlled anger. Professional voice synthesis software, high-end computing resources, consultation with digital manipulation experts, and legal strategy development. This wasn't a spontaneous decision driven by grief or disappointment. This was a planned campaign designed to destroy your reputation and steal your inheritance. The financial records revealed another disturbing detail. Many of the payments had been made jointly by Jessica and my mother, suggesting that Linda Chen had been an active participant in the conspiracy from its earliest stages. The woman who'd raised me, who'd taught me about honesty and integrity, who'd supposedly been the moral center of our family, had helped fund a sophisticated campaign of digital deception designed to destroy one daughter in order to benefit another. Dr. Park pulled up additional analysis showing how the synthetic recordings had been distributed and stored. The audio files contained embedded metadata that had been carefully manipulated to suggest they'd been recorded using my father's smartphone during private conversations in his hospital room. The timestamps corresponded with actual medical appointments and family visits, creating a convincing timeline that would be difficult to challenge without detailed technical analysis. The metadata manipulation is particularly sophisticated, Dr. Park explained. They've embedded fake GPS coordinates, device identifiers, and recording parameters that would fool most forensic analysts who aren't specifically looking for signs of AI generation. This level of technical sophistication suggests either professional training in digital forensics or access to commercial software designed for creating false evidence. The scope of Jessica's attack was becoming clear. She'd created an entire fabricated reality supported by multiple forms of synthetic evidence, each piece carefully crafted to corroborate the others and create an overwhelming impression of authenticity. Audio recordings provided emotional impact, financial records suggested motive and opportunity, text messages offered supporting context, and email exchanges created additional corroboration for the central narrative.
But the most disturbing aspect was the psychological sophistication of the deception. Jessica had clearly studied techniques of emotional manipulation and gaslighting, creating synthetic conversations that were designed not just to provide legal evidence, but to undermine my confidence in my own memories and perceptions. The fabricated recordings included details about family interactions that were close enough to reality to be confusing, making me question my own recollections of events I knew I'd experienced. The good news, Monica said, though her tone suggested the news wasn't particularly good, is that the technical evidence clearly shows artificial generation. Dr. Park's analysis will be devastating to their case once we get it in front of a judge who understands the technology. The bad news, Dr. Park added, is that this level of sophisticated deception represents a new category of threat that the legal system isn't prepared to handle. If AI-generated evidence this convincing becomes commonplace, it could fundamentally undermine the reliability of audio and video testimony in legal proceedings. As I sat in that conference room, surrounded by the digital debris of my sister's carefully planned attack, I realized that Jessica's conspiracy was larger than a family inheritance dispute. It was a test case for how American society would cope with the weaponization of artificial intelligence against the foundations of truth and trust that held our legal and social systems together. The full scope of her attack was now visible, a comprehensive campaign of digital deception that had required months of planning, substantial financial resources, technical expertise, and intimate knowledge of family dynamics. Jessica hadn't just tried to steal my inheritance, she'd attempted to destroy my reputation, undermine my sanity, and demonstrate that sophisticated AI technology could be used to rewrite history itself. The war I'd been preparing for was bigger and more dangerous than I'd imagined. And it was just beginning. Strategic preparation phase. The revelation of Jessica's comprehensive digital assault transformed my entire approach to the legal battle ahead. What had begun as a family inheritance dispute had evolved into something far more significant. A test case for how the American legal system would handle sophisticated AI-generated deception in an era when seeing and hearing were no longer synonymous with believing. I realized that my defense couldn't just focus on proving my innocence, it needed to expose the broader implications of synthetic media fraud and establish precedents that would protect future victims from similar attacks. Monica Rivera's law firm became my second home as we assembled a defense team that combined traditional estate law expertise with cutting-edge knowledge of digital forensics and artificial intelligence technology. The complexity of Jessica's deception required specialists from multiple disciplines: computer scientists who understood neural networks and voice synthesis algorithms, cybersecurity experts who could trace digital fingerprints and analyze metadata, psychologists who could explain the impact of synthetic media on memory and perception, and legal scholars who understood the constitutional implications of AI-generated evidence in courtroom proceedings. Dr. James Park's technical analysis became the foundation of our counterattack strategy. His team at Oregon Health and Science University had developed proprietary tools for detecting AI-generated audio that could identify synthetic speech with over 95% accuracy, even when the source material was professionally generated using commercial voice cloning software. The spectral analysis, frequency domain examination, and harmonic distortion patterns in Jessica's fabricated recordings created an unmistakable technical signature that proved artificial generation beyond any reasonable doubt. But technical proof was only part of the challenge we faced. Jessica's legal team would argue that my background in cybersecurity gave me both the motive and the expertise to fabricate counter-evidence that appeared to discredit authentic recordings. They would claim that my technical knowledge allowed me to create false forensic analysis that supported my denial of conversations that had actually occurred. The irony was devastating. My expertise in detecting digital deception was being positioned as evidence that I could create sophisticated false evidence to support my own lies. Monica developed a multi-layered defense strategy that addressed both the technical and legal aspects of Jessica's attack. We would present comprehensive forensic evidence proving that the audio recordings were artificially generated, but we would also demonstrate the broader pattern of deception that included financial fraud, document forgery, and conspiracy to manipulate legal proceedings. The goal wasn't just to win the inheritance case, it was to expose Jessica's conspiracy in a way that would result in criminal charges and establish legal precedents for future synthetic media cases. The financial investigation revealed the true scope of Jessica's planning and the depth of my mother's involvement in the conspiracy. Linda Chen had not only helped fund the creation of synthetic evidence, she had provided intimate details about family dynamics, medical information, and personal relationships that were essential to creating convincing fabricated conversations. Her participation wasn't passive or reluctant. She had been an active strategist who helped design psychological manipulation tactics that were specifically calibrated to my personality and emotional vulnerabilities. Bank records showed that Jessica and my mother had jointly funded consulting relationships with digital marketing firms that specialized in reputation management and narrative construction. These companies, operating in legal gray areas, provided services that included creating synthetic social media profiles, generating false online reviews, and manufacturing digital evidence that could be used in legal proceedings. The paper trail revealed a shadow industry that had emerged to serve clients who needed to manipulate digital reality for financial or legal advantage. We discovered that Jessica had hired Pinnacle Digital Solutions, a Portland-based firm that marketed itself as providing advanced communication strategies for complex family situations. Their services included voice synthesis, document manipulation, social media engineering, and what they euphemistically called memory reconstruction, the creation of false evidence designed to make targets question their own recollections of events. The company's client list included individuals involved in high-stakes divorce proceedings, inheritance disputes, and custody battles where traditional evidence wasn't sufficient to support their desired outcomes. The psychological dimension of Jessica's attack was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of her strategy. She had clearly studied techniques of gaslighting and emotional manipulation, creating synthetic evidence that was designed not just to provide legal ammunition, but to undermine my mental health and confidence in my own memories. The fabricated conversations included details that were close enough to reality to be confusing, references to family interactions that had occurred but were taken out of context, and emotional manipulation tactics that were specifically designed to trigger guilt and self-doubt. Rebecca Martinez, a forensic psychologist who specialized in family fraud cases, helped me understand the sophisticated psychological warfare that Jessica had employed. The synthetic recordings weren't just false evidence, they were psychological weapons designed to isolate me from family support, undermine my confidence in my own perceptions, and create emotional distress that would make it difficult for me to present an effective legal defense. This type of coordinated deception creates a form of technological gaslighting, Dr. Martinez explained during one of our preparation sessions. The victim begins to question not just specific conversations, but their entire understanding of family relationships and personal history. It's a particularly cruel form of psychological abuse because it uses technology to attack the victim's fundamental sense of reality. The broader implications of Jessica's attack extended far beyond our family situation. Monica had been contacted by attorneys from across the country who were dealing with similar cases involving AI-generated evidence in legal proceedings. The democratization of sophisticated voice synthesis technology was creating a wave of synthetic media fraud that threatened to overwhelm court systems that weren't equipped to distinguish between authentic and artificially generated evidence. We collaborated with the FBI's Cybercrime Division to ensure that Jessica's case would be treated as part of a broader pattern of AI-enabled fraud that required federal attention and resources. Agent Torres had been tracking similar cases involving synthetic media manipulation in legal proceedings, and he believed that successful prosecution of Jessica's conspiracy could establish important precedents for future investigations. The investigation revealed that Jessica's attack was more sophisticated than even we had initially realized. She hadn't just created synthetic audio recordings, she had constructed an entire false digital ecosystem that included fabricated social media interactions, manufactured email exchanges with medical professionals, and forged financial documents that appeared to support her narrative of my manipulation and fraud. Every aspect of the deception had been carefully planned and executed with professional expertise that suggested extensive consultation with specialists in digital manipulation and legal strategy. Perhaps most disturbing was the discovery that Jessica had been conducting surveillance on our family communications for over a year before Dad's death. She had somehow gained access to text messages, email accounts, and possibly recorded phone conversations that provided the intimate knowledge necessary to create convincing synthetic evidence. The technical sophistication required for this level of surveillance suggested either professional assistance or capabilities that went far beyond Jessica's known technical skills. We learned that Jessica had enrolled in online courses in digital marketing, artificial intelligence, and cybersecurity over the 18 months preceding her attack. She had systematically educated herself about voice synthesis technology, metadata manipulation, and digital forensics in order to create deception that could fool even trained professionals. Her preparation had been methodical and comprehensive, demonstrating a level of planning and commitment that transformed what might have been dismissed as a family squabble into a serious criminal conspiracy. The discovery process also revealed Jessica's backup plans for dealing with potential exposure of her deception. She had prepared alternative narratives that would position any technical evidence of artificial generation as proof of my own sophisticated fraud rather than evidence of her guilt. Her legal strategy included character assassination tactics designed to present me as a manipulative cybersecurity expert who was using my technical knowledge to create false evidence and manipulate legal proceedings. As our defense preparation intensified, I found myself grappling with the broader implications of living in an era when family members could weaponize artificial intelligence against each other with devastating effectiveness. The same technologies that promised to democratize creativity and communication were being perverted to serve the darkest impulses of human nature: greed, jealousy, and the desire to destroy those who stood in the way of personal ambition. The strategic preparation phase had revealed that Jessica's attack was not just a personal betrayal, but a glimpse into a future where sophisticated digital deception could be deployed by anyone with sufficient motivation and resources. The legal battle we were preparing for would determine not just the outcome of our family inheritance dispute, but whether truth could survive in an age of artificial intelligence. The unexpected alliance. The phone call came at 11:30 on a Wednesday night in late May, 3 weeks before our court date was scheduled to begin. I was in my apartment reviewing forensic reports and technical documentation for what felt like the 1,000th time, trying to memorize every detail of Dr. Park's analysis and Monica's legal strategy. The number was blocked, but something about the timing made me answer despite my general policy of avoiding unknown callers during the legal proceedings. "Sarah?" The voice was barely above a whisper, shaky with emotion and fear. "It's David, please don't hang up." My younger brother sounded like he was calling from inside a cave, his voice echoing strangely as if he was trying to muffle the conversation from potential listeners. The paranoia that had become my constant companion immediately kicked into high gear as I wondered who might be monitoring his communications and why he felt the need to disguise his location. "David, where are you? You sound..." "I'm in the parking garage at my apartment building." I needed somewhere that I knew wasn't being monitored. His voice cracked slightly and I could hear the weight of whatever revelation had driven him to make this clandestine phone call. "Sarah? I have something you need to see. Something that changes everything." The word monitored sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the cool Portland night air drifting through my windows. If David was worried about surveillance, it meant the conspiracy I'd been uncovering was even more extensive than we'd realized. Jessica and my mother hadn't just fabricated evidence, they'd been conducting ongoing intelligence gathering that extended to monitoring other family members. "What kind of something?" I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "Documentation. Communications between Jessica and Mom that go back over a year. Audio recordings of conversations where they planned the whole thing. Financial records showing payments to companies I'd never heard of. Sarah, they've been planning this since before Dad was even diagnosed." The implications hit me like a physical blow. Jessica's conspiracy hadn't been a reaction to Dad's will, or a spontaneous decision driven by disappointment over her inheritance. It had been a premeditated campaign that began before our father was even seriously ill, suggesting a level of calculating cruelty that went beyond anything I'd imagined possible from my own family members. "How did you get this documentation?" I asked, though I suspected the answer would reveal another layer of family dysfunction that I wasn't prepared to confront. David's silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had been disconnected. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a mixture of shame and determination that told me everything I needed to know about the moral compromise he'd been forced to make. "I've been recording them," he said quietly. "For months. Every conversation, every phone call, every planning session they thought I wasn't paying attention to. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't understand the scope until recently. Sarah, they've been treating me like their unwitting accomplice while using me to gather intelligence about your activities and emotional state." The revelation that David had been conducting counter-surveillance on our mother and sister while they used him as an intelligence asset created a picture of family dynamics so dysfunctional it bordered on the surreal. Our household had become a collection of competing intelligence operations, with family members spying on each other, using technologies that would have been available only to professional surveillance services just a few years earlier. "They think I'm too passive and naive to understand what they're doing," David continued, his voice gaining strength as he described the role he'd been assigned in Jessica's conspiracy. "They've been using me to monitor your daily routines, your emotional responses to the legal proceedings, your relationships with attorneys and technical experts. I've been their intelligence asset without even realizing it." We arranged to meet the following evening at a coffee shop in Northeast Portland that neither of us had ever visited before. Following operational security protocols that seemed absurd for a family gathering, but had become necessary, given the level of deception and surveillance that had infected our relationships. David insisted on additional precautions, separate arrivals, cash payments to avoid credit card records, and communication through a secure messaging app that couldn't be easily monitored by Jessica's technical consultants. The documentation that David provided the next evening was devastating in its comprehensiveness and chilling in its implications for our family's future. He had compiled hundreds of hours of recorded conversations, thousands of text messages and emails, financial records spanning 18 months, and photographic evidence of meetings between Jessica, my mother, and various technical consultants who had helped design and implement their campaign of digital deception. The earliest recordings dated back to the month after Dad's cancer diagnosis, revealing that Jessica and my mother had begun planning their assault on my inheritance before the disease had even progressed to a terminal stage. Their conversations showed a calculating coldness that was difficult to reconcile with the grief and family loyalty they had publicly displayed during Dad's illness and funeral. "The house should have been mine anyway," Jessica's voice said in one early recording, her tone carrying the entitlement that had apparently driven her to such extreme measures. "Dad always favored Sarah because of her technical background, but I'm the one who actually understands business. I'm the one who could turn Chen Analytics into something significant." My mother's responses in these recordings revealed the depth of her involvement in planning and executing the conspiracy. Linda Chen wasn't a reluctant accomplice or a grieving widow who had been manipulated by her eldest daughter. She was an active strategist who provided crucial intelligence about family dynamics, medical information, and psychological vulnerabilities that made Jessica's deception possible. "Sarah's always been too trusting," my mother's voice explained in another recording. "She believes that family members have each other's best interests at heart. That naivety will make her vulnerable to emotional manipulation if we present the evidence properly." The financial records that David had compiled painted a picture of extensive investment in professional deception services that went far beyond the voice synthesis technology we'd already discovered. Jessica and my mother had funded comprehensive surveillance capabilities, hired social media manipulation specialists, and consulted with attorneys who specialized in using fabricated evidence in legal proceedings. But perhaps most disturbing was the discovery that they had been monitoring my communications and activities throughout the entire period of Dad's illness and the subsequent legal proceedings. David had documented evidence showing that Jessica had gained access to my email accounts, phone records, and possibly my apartment through surveillance equipment that had been professionally installed while I was at work or traveling for business. "They know about your defense strategy," David said, as we reviewed the surveillance evidence in the coffee shop's back corner, speaking in voices barely above whispers, despite the ambient noise that provided natural cover for our conversation. "They have recordings of your conversations with Monica and Dr. Park. They know about the FBI investigation. They've been planning countermeasures for every defense tactic you've developed." The revelation that Jessica had been conducting comprehensive surveillance on my legal defense preparations meant that our entire strategy would need to be reconsidered. If she knew about our technical evidence, our expert witnesses, and our legal arguments, she would be prepared with counter-narratives and alternative explanations that could undermine everything we'd worked to build. "There's something else," David said, pulling out a small digital recorder that looked like it belonged in a spy movie rather than a family inheritance dispute. "Something that changes the legal implications beyond just inheritance fraud." He played an audio file that had been recorded just 2 weeks earlier, during a conversation between Jessica and my mother, that revealed the true scope of their criminal conspiracy. They weren't just planning to steal my inheritance, they were discussing strategies for using similar techniques against other family members, business associates, and potentially future legal opponents who might challenge their expanding use of AI-generated evidence. "This isn't just about the Chen family anymore," Jessica's voice explained in the recording. "The techniques we've developed could be applied to any situation where we need to influence legal proceedings or public opinion. We've essentially created a blueprint for winning any dispute, where emotional manipulation and fabricated evidence can override objective facts." The recording revealed that Jessica viewed our family's destruction as a proof of concept for technologies and techniques that could be monetized and deployed against other targets. She and my mother had been discussing the possibility of commercializing their expertise in synthetic media fraud, creating a consulting business that would help wealthy clients manipulate legal proceedings through sophisticated digital deception. David's decision to expose Jessica's conspiracy had been driven by the realization that their plans extended far beyond stealing my inheritance. They were essentially testing techniques that could be used to defraud other families, manipulate legal proceedings across multiple jurisdictions, and potentially influence political or business outcomes through sophisticated synthetic media campaigns. "I can't be part of this anymore," David said, as we concluded our clandestine meeting. "What they're planning isn't just fraud, it's the systematic destruction of truth itself. If they succeed with their attack on you, they'll use those same techniques against other victims who don't have your technical background or resources to fight back." The documentation that David provided transformed our defense from a reactive strategy focused on proving my innocence into a proactive investigation that would expose a criminal conspiracy with implications far beyond our family situation. We now had evidence of premeditation, ongoing surveillance, and plans for future crimes that would justify federal intervention and potentially result in decades of prison time for Jessica and my mother. But David's alliance also created new vulnerabilities and ethical complications that would need to be carefully managed as we approached the courtroom confrontation. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.